In today's video, I'm discussing the 3 most common spiritual challenges I hear from our spiritual community, and they're: number 1, feeling stuck after making initial progress; number 2, processing criticism from teachers; and number 3, comparing your experience to others. These challenges aren't signs of success or failure. They're actually stepping stones on the path to deeper understanding. Today, I'm breaking down each of these challenges and considering the opportunity within each one. Most importantly, I'll share practical approaches for discovering grace precisely in these moments that feel like spiritual dead ends. If you've been questioning your path, this conversation might be specifically for you. So hello and welcome. I'm Helen DaVita and love sharing perspectives. Please do press like, subscribe, share and comment so I can continue to bring more insights and lectures and continue building a supportive community. It's already wonderful with all your comments, and everything that you share helps build the channel. Now, the first thing to discuss, the illusion of linear progress. Have you ever found yourself sitting in a development circle or practicing meditation diligently for months, only to feel like you've made no progress at all? Well, this paradoxical experience lies at the heart of our spiritual journey. We might sit faithfully on a regular basis, follow all the instructions, and yet sometimes that sense of progress remains frustratingly elusive. You see, most of us approach our spiritual path with the same mental framework we've applied to other areas in our life. You see, we expect that consistent effort will yield predictable results, much like how regular exercise strengthens muscles or how studying leads to a mastery of a subject. We create internal timelines and milestones, often unconsciously, against which we measure our spiritual development. We might think that by 6 months, I should experience deeper states of presence, connect with spirit, perhaps even give a productive reading. By a year, perhaps even there's glimpses of working professionally. But what really happens when reality doesn't conform to these expectations? Well, I remember a long period of my own journey. Rather than experiencing these profound insights and states of consciousness I had anticipated, I entered what felt like a spiritual desert for some time. The subtle sensations and moments of clarity I had previously experienced seemed to vanish completely. My sessions seemed to become dry, mechanical routines. I'd sit with a growing sense that I was somehow failing at spirituality itself. What I didn't understand then was that spiritual development rarely follows a linear trajectory. Ancient traditions have long recognized that genuine spiritual growth moves in cycles, expanding and contracting, advancing and retreating. That's how it goes. The Zen tradition speaks of mountains and valleys along the path. Christian mysticism acknowledges periods of consolation and desolation. These aren't signs of failure, but actually they're essential components of authentic spiritual unfoldment. Now, this understanding illuminates the profound significance of what St. John of the Cross called the dark night of the soul. Those periods when previous spiritual consolations disappear. Far from being mistakes or indications of a step backwards, these challenging periods present necessary thresholds. They often precede the most significant shifts in our consciousness, clearing away our attachments to particular spiritual experiences or outcomes. The Bhagavad Gita addresses this directly in its teachings of karmic yoga, the wisdom of performing our duties without attachment to results. When Krishna instructs Arjuna, you have a right to your actions, but never to your actions' fruits, which is about attachment really, isn't it? So you have a right, a free will, but you don't have a right to the outcome of your free will. It is not your right. When we grasp for specific spiritual outcomes, we create the very suffering we seek to transcend. The expectation itself becomes our obstacle. What's most remarkable is that grace often operates most powerfully and precisely when we feel most disconnected from our path. Those periods of apparent stagnation or regression may actually be the times when the deepest transformations are occurring beneath our conscious awareness. The dissolution of our spiritual identity, with all its expectations and demands, creates space for something entirely new to emerge. It's actually an exciting period, even though we feel frustrated. The second thing to discuss is the teacher's mirror, and that's transforming criticism into spiritual insight. The criticism that makes you question your entire spiritual path might actually be a doorway to your most significant breakthrough. Those moments when a teacher's words cut through your spiritual identity often contain the precise insight your consciousness has been seeking. This truth transformed my understanding of the teacher-student relationships in ways that I never anticipated. Because we approach our spiritual teachers with a peculiar duality, seeking both validation and transformation. Yet these desires fundamentally contradict each other. True transformation requires the dismantling of our existing self-concept, while validation reinforces it. This unacknowledged tension creates the perfect conditions for disappointment and even heartbreak when teachers don't fulfill our unspoken expectations for approval. I experienced this firsthand during a 10-day retreat when my meditation teacher took me aside after a particularly intense session. "You're collecting states of consciousness like souvenirs," she said, her eyes reflecting both compassion and unflinching clarity. "You're using these experiences to bolster your spiritual identity rather than allowing them to dissolve it." Now that hit home. I'm trying to bolster my spiritual identity. Yes, I was. That's why I was there, I thought, rather than allowing them to dissolve it. I guess we can only become whole and connected to everything and part of this beautiful universe when we dissolve so much of our spiritual identity and we just be, we just are. And that's what she must have been talking about. In fact, I know that's what she was talking about, but her words felt like a physical punch, not because they were harsh, but because they revealed a truth I'd been unconsciously avoiding. I had been engaging in what a Buddhist teacher called spiritual materialism, treating enlightened states as achievements rather than doorways. That's an interesting one, isn't it? Because, you know, we can sit, whether you sit in the power, whether you meditate, whether you sit for trance, whether you demonstrate on a platform or do a one-to-one. In our minds, we make it a results-based event rather than a doorway. Interesting. What complicates this relationship further is the psychological mechanism of projection. We unconsciously attribute to our teachers qualities that actually represent our own undeveloped potential or unresolved issues. When a teacher reflects something we're reluctant to see, our first instinct is often to reject not just the feedback, but to reject the teacher themselves. Yet this uncomfortable mirroring contains the most valuable teaching of all. The Buddhist concept of skillful means provides a framework for understanding this dynamic. You see, this teaching suggests that wise spiritual guides adapt their methods to what will most effectively awaken their students. Sometimes this requires gentle encouragement, but other times it demands direct confrontation with our most cherished self-concepts. The criticism that feels most personal might actually be the most carefully calibrated to our progress. Doesn't feel like it at the time, but it's true. And this understanding transforms how we receive challenging feedback from our teachers. Instead of interpreting criticism as rejection, we might ask, what is being revealed here that I've been unable to see myself? When we shift from seeking approval to recognizing the mirror being held up to us, we discover that challenging feedback often illuminates precisely the challenge we need to cross next in our development. However, if we have good cause to realize that the teacher themselves is unenlightened, inexperienced, or just plain offensive, we might not need to chastise ourselves or mirror that suffering. If we chastise ourselves and mirror them, then in this case, we are not receiving authentic teaching. And the third and final important thing to discuss is what I call the grace paradox. Finding peace when the path disappears. Beyond the mirrors our teachers hold up to us lies an even deeper spiritual paradox. What happens when we stop trying to make progress altogether? This question points to the subtle yet powerful way that our very effort to achieve spiritual growth often becomes its greatest obstacle. Now imagine sitting in a crowded meditation hall. Everyone around you seems seemingly absorbed in profound silence, stillness, while your mind races with thoughts and your body screams with discomfort. This exact scenario unfolded during the silent retreat I once attended. Each morning, as we gathered for group meditation, I found myself in a mental prison of comparison. Other students appeared serene, their posture perfect, their breathing rhythmic. Surely they were experiencing the deep states of awareness I'd come from or to. Meanwhile, my knees hurt, my back ached, and my mind produced an endless stream of worries, plans, and judgments. The harder I tried to force my experience to match what I imagined others were feeling, the more elusive peace became. Spiritual comparison has transformed into something more insidious. Social media platforms overflow with profound quotes about transcendent spiritual experiences. Without intending to, spiritual communities often create invisible hierarchies of attainment. Whose insights are most profound? Whose presence is most luminous? Who has the greatest healing ability, or who is the most accurate medium? These comparisons create a spiritual marketplace where certain experiences are valued over others, generating a particularly subtle form of suffering, a lack of grace, and an abundance of insecurities. The psychological impact of this spiritual comparison is profound. It creates an environment where we continually measure our internal experience against others' external presentations, inevitably finding ourselves lacking. The hierarchy of attainment, whether explicit or implicit, fundamentally contradicts the very freedom that spiritual practice aims to cultivate. What neuroscience reveals about this paradox is particularly fascinating. Research on the brain regions which are active when we're not focused on external tasks shows something surprising. During meditation, this network quiets down. But interestingly, this quieting happens most effectively when we stop striving for particular states. The very neural activity associated with deeper awareness emerges precisely when we release our grasp on trying to make it happen. This scientific insight parallels what spiritual traditions have taught for centuries. The Sufi path speaks of suffering to divine will rather than imposing our own. Christian mysticism emphasizes that grace cannot be earned, but only received through openness. These traditions recognize that spiritual transformation isn't achieved through force of will, but through letting go of our demand to control outcomes. Let me say that again, letting go of our demand to control outcomes. We're control freaks, aren't we? My own breakthrough at the retreat came unexpectedly on the fourth day. Exhausted from fighting my experience, I finally surrendered. I stopped trying to meditate correctly and simply allowed my discomfort to exist without judgment. In that moment of giving up, something shifted, not because I'd finally achieved the right technique, but because I'd stopped demanding that my experience conforms to my expectations. So, in conclusion, I find myself returning to a profound truth echoed by many spiritual teachers across different traditions. Our greatest challenges on the spiritual path aren't obstacles. They are doorways to transformation. In the words of the great teacher Charaji, all your problems are stemming from desire. Every challenge can become a gift for you. Consider how this wisdom might illuminate your own spiritual difficulties. When progress halts, when teachers challenge you, when others seem to advance while you struggle, are precisely when grace is working most powerfully beneath the surface. Perhaps the most sacred alchemy happens not when everything flows easily, but in those disorientating spaces where our expectations dissolve, where we cannot control outcomes, where we finally surrender our spiritual ambitions. I will leave you with a question to reflect upon. Could the very spiritual challenge that disturbs you now be the exact gift your soul has been seeking? Thank you. Thanks for your support on Insights on a Spiritual Path, and please subscribe, share, and check out the great links in the description.